Chili, come on in here and sit down with your auntie for a minute. Pull up a seat, the good one. The one with the cushion that ain't lumpy. You know how I like my tea. Hot, strong, and with just enough honey to sweeten the truth, but not enough to hide the burn. Well, the story I'm about to pour for you today is scorching. It's got a heat that'll travel right up your spine and make your spirit curl. It's a story about love, lies, and the kind of audacity that'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew about the wickedness of man. It's about a good woman, a trifling, no good, sorry excuse for a man, and the beautiful, beautiful bill that always comes due. Because karma, honey, karma might take the scenic route. She might stop for gas, a bag of chips, and a diet soda, but she never, ever misses her exit. Now, this story is about my girl, Imani. And when I tell you Imani was a good woman, I don't mean good like boring. I mean, she was crafted from sunshine and honey with a spine made of pure, unadulterated steel she didn't even know she had yet. The kind of woman who remembers your half birthday, who talks to her plants while she waters them, who believed in the inherent good of people even when they showed her in flashing neon signs that they were rotten to the absolute core. For 3 years, she believed she was a widow. 3 long, draining, soul-sucking years of wearing black on the inside, even when she had to paint a brave smile on her face for her little boy, Leo. For 3 years, she visited a memorial bench by a lake, a cheap metal thing with a small tarnished plaque that misspelled his middle name. She'd sit there, rain or shine, and tell her dead husband how much his son missed a father he'd never truly remember. She described Leo's first words, the funny way he danced with his whole body when his favorite cartoon came on, the gaping hole that was growing in his little heart, where a daddy was supposed to be. She worked until her hands were raw and her soul was tired, just to keep a leaky roof over their heads in a neighborhood that had long given up. But the other day, while scrolling through Instagram on a rare moment of peace, her back aching from a double shift and her feet swollen inside her worn-out sneakers, she saw a post. A travel blogger she vaguely knew from college had posted a sneak peek of a fairy tale wedding on Lake Como, Italy, and the groom, Chile. The groom was no stranger. The groom was her husband. The man she had mourned, the man she had buried in the deepest parts of her heart, was standing on a sun-drenched balcony, looking richer, healthier, and happier than she had ever seen him, about to marry someone else. He faked his own death. He left her and his own child in squalor to go live a life of luxury. But he forgot one crucial thing. The devil works hard, but a woman who's been played for a fool doesn't just work harder. She becomes the main event. She becomes the director, the producer, and the star of a blockbuster revenge movie that deserves its own premiere. But before we get to the part where Imani is standing on an Italian terrace looking like a goddess of vengeance dipped in fire, let me take you back. Let me tell you about David. No, David. When Imani met him, she was a rising star in the culinary world, a pastry chef with hands blessed by the ancestors. Her cakes weren't just food, they were edible architecture. She could spin sugar into glass that shattered on the tongue and paint with chocolate like it was oil on canvas. Her signature was a lavender-infused honey cake with a salted caramel buttercream that tasted like a perfect summer afternoon. She had a detailed business plan, a fire in her belly, and a small but growing inheritance from her grandmother that was meant to be the down payment on her own bakery. Her dream. She had the name picked out and everything, written in a beautiful script in a leather-bound notebook, The Sweet Life. It was her everything. And then came David. He slid into her life smoother than buttercream frosting left out in the sun. They met at a charity gala she was catering. She was in her chef's whites, a little smudge of cocoa on her cheek, focused and in her element. He came up to her dessert table not to grab a miniature tart, but to look directly at her. He had a smile that could talk a bird right out of a tree, and a way of looking at her that made her feel like she was the only person in a room of 500. He wasn't a baker, he was an investment advisor, he said, his title rolling off his tongue like it was something important. He was always talking in big money terms about portfolios and futures and emerging markets. He saw her ambition, her nest egg, not as a beautiful thing to nurture, but as a resource to be tapped, a well to be drained dry. He'd hold her face in his hands, his eyes all dark and earnest, his thumb stroking her cheek. Imani, baby, your talent is world class. It's divine. But a brick and mortar bakery, it's a chain around your ankles in this economy. All that overhead, the staffing, the health department, the permits, it'll bleed you dry before you even sell your first cake. You're an artist, not a bookkeeper. He'd pull her close, his voice a low, hypnotic hum. Let me make your money work for you. Let me build an empire for us so you can create your art without worrying about the bills. Imagine a private studio, the best ingredients flown in from all over the world, no stress, just you and your genius. And Lord, she believed him. She was in love, the kind of deep, dizzying, head over heels love that makes you deaf to the little alarms going off in the back of your mind. She gave up her baker dream for his dream of their future. He made it sound so logical, so much bigger than her little shop. She walked with him to the bank, her heart fluttering with excitement, and put her entire inheritance, every last dime her grandmother had scrimped and saved from cleaning houses, into a joint account that he was supposed to invest. Our legacy, he called it, his voice thick with emotion as he signed the papers next to her. He cried, "Honey." Actual real-looking tears streamed down his face. He told her she had just laid the foundation for their dynasty, for their children's children. He was a performance artist, and his greatest role was the man you can trust. A year later, their son Leo was born. A beautiful, perfect baby boy with his father's charming eyes and his mother's sweet spirit. David was the perfect doting father, a masterclass in paternal devotion. He'd rock Leo to sleep, whispering promises of the world he was going to give him. He bought him a tiny cashmere blanket that cost more than their weekly groceries, posting a picture of it on social media with the caption, "Only the best for my prince." He took hundreds of photos, curating a perfect image of domestic bliss for the world to see. He was a performance artist, and his new role was perfect husband and father. He deserved an Oscar for it. Truly. But behind the scenes, behind the filtered photos and loving captions, the cracks were starting to show. The investments always needed more capital. "The market's volatile, baby," he'd murmur late at night, his hand tracing soothing circles on her back as she tried to fight off the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "I have to move some things around. We need to leverage the house for a short-term loan, just to cover this next big play. It's an algorithm I've developed, a guaranteed win. When this hits, Imani, we're done. We're on a beach for the rest of our lives." He'd show her complicated-looking charts on his laptop, full of green arrows pointing up, using words like derivatives and arbitrage, until her head spun. It was designed to confuse her, to make her feel small, and him seem brilliant. She trusted him. He was the father of her child, the keeper of her dreams, so why would she not? He made her feel silly for even questioning him. "Don't you worry your pretty head about the numbers, baby. That's my job. Your job is to love me and our boy and make the world a sweeter place." The calls from creditors started as a trickle, then became a flood. She'd answer the phone and hear a stern voice asking for Mr. Miller, talking about overdue payments on credit cards she didn't even know they had. American Express Platinum, a black card, cards with limits that made her feel sick. He was always so calm, so reassuring when she confronted him, her hand shaking as she held a statement for $30,000. It's a strategy, Imani. It's about building a credit profile for bigger loans. You have to spend money to make money. They just don't understand high-level finance. Don't you worry your pretty head about it, baby. I've got it under control. He'd intercept the mail, he'd answer the phone, building a wall of lies around her, isolating her in a fortress of his own design. Then came the day the world cracked open and swallowed her whole. He was going on a weekend trip with a potential investor. A man he'd been courting for months, he said. A fishing trip on one of the Great Lakes. A chance to close the deal that would finally set them free. He kissed her that morning. A long, lingering kiss that felt different somehow. Final. Heavy. He held Leo tight, burying his face in his son's soft, curly hair for a full minute. You be good for your mama, little man. Daddy loves you so much. You're my legacy. He looked at Imani, his eyes glassy. I love you more than life, Imani. Never, ever forget that. She watched him walk out the front door, his briefcase in hand. She had no idea he was walking out of their lives forever. The call came on a Sunday evening. She was giving Leo a bath, the small bathroom filled with steam and the sound of his happy splashing. The phone rang, an unknown number. It was the police, a sergeant with a tired, gravelly voice. There had been a boating accident. A sudden violent storm had come out of nowhere. They found the wreckage of the boat, splintered wood scattered across the waves like matchsticks. They found the other man, the investor, clinging to a cooler, suffering from severe hypothermia and shock. But David was gone. They searched for a week, divers in the murky cold, sonar pinging into the depths, helicopters buzzing overhead like angry wasps. They found a piece of his jacket, a navy blue windbreaker she'd bought him for his birthday, snagged on a rock near the shore. But they never found a body. The official explanation was that the current was treacherous. He'd been pulled under and swept away into the vast, unforgiving lake. Imani's world didn't just end. It imploded. It became a black hole of grief and shock. The funeral was a surreal nightmare of whispers and pitying looks at a closed casket, an empty box for an empty life. People patted her hand and told her he was in a better place. She wanted to scream. There was no better place than here, with her, with his son. She stood there, in a cheap black dress she'd had to buy on a credit card, holding her baby, feeling like a ghost at her own life's funeral. And then the vultures descended. With David legally declared dead, the mountain of debt he had built in secret came crashing down on Imani's head. The investments, the big plays, it was all smoke and mirrors, a Ponzi scheme of lies. He had leveraged everything they owned and then some. The bank, with cold impersonal efficiency, took the house, the one where Leo took his first steps. The car was repossessed in the middle of the night, the tow truck's flashing lights painting her bedroom walls in strokes of red and blue humiliation. They took every penny from the joint account, which of course was nearly empty. Her inheritance, her grandmother's legacy, her dream of the sweet life, it was all gone, vaporized. She was left with a toddler, a heart full of shrapnel, and the suffocating weight of his lies. She and Leo moved into a tiny, rundown 2-room apartment with peeling paint, a persistent smell of damp and old cabbage, and windows that rattled like old bones when the wind blew. For 3 years, that was her reality. She grieved for a man who never existed. She mourned a love that was a lie. She sold her wedding ring, a simple gold band, to a pawn shop for $75 just to keep the lights on. She remembered the feeling of the cold glass countertop, the indifferent eyes of the man behind it, the hollow feeling in her gut as she walked out, her finger feeling naked and light. She packed his things away in boxes, but she kept one thing he'd given her, a small silver compass on a leather cord. On the back, he'd had it engraved. So, you can always find your way back to me. The irony was so bitter, It could curdle milk. She tucked it away in a shoebox of memories she couldn't bear to look at. She went back to what she knew. Baking, but not in a gleaming shop of her own. She started a small word-of-mouth business out of her cramped, sweltering kitchen. She'd bake all night, birthday cakes for neighbors, cupcakes for office parties. While Leo slept in the next room, she'd deliver them on the bus, her body aching with a bone-deep exhaustion she didn't know was possible. It was barely enough to pay the rent and keep food on the table. She was a ghost of the woman she used to be, covered in a fine, constant dusting of flour and grief. Which brings us to that afternoon. She was slumped at her small kitchen table, a mountain of dirty bowls beside her, covered in flour, her back screaming in protest. Leo was at a neighbor's, a sweet older woman who would watch him for a few dollars. She had a few precious moments to herself. She pulled out her phone, the screen cracked and faded, and opened Instagram for a hit of mindless distraction, a window into a world that wasn't hers. And there it was. A post from an old college acquaintance, a girl named Tiffany, who had rebranded herself as Tiff Travels, a luxury lifestyle blogger. The video was breathtaking, a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the impossible blue of Lake Como. Crystal glasses, women in flowing silk dresses, men in crisp linen. The caption read, "A sneak peek from the most romantic event of the season. The pre-wedding brunch for elusive tech mogul Dante Moretti and hotel heiress Isabella Rossi. This is a true modern fairy tale." Imani almost scrolled past. What did she care about some tech mogul's fairy tale? Her life was a cautionary tale. But something made her pause. The camera panned to the happy couple, clinking champagne glasses. The heiress Isabella was stunning. Sharp, intelligent eyes, a confident smile, draped in what was probably $1 million of casual couture. And the man beside her, he was laughing. His head was tilted back in a way that was so painfully, intimately familiar. He was leaner, more chiseled. The cheap off-the-rack suits he used to wear were replaced by a bespoke linen jacket that probably cost more than Imani's annual income. He had a new haircut, styled with expensive product, a deep Mediterranean tan that spoke of yachts and leisure. He looked like money. Oh, money. But underneath the Italian sun and the expensive tailoring, it was him. Imani's breath hitched. The air left her lungs in a whoosh. The phone slipped aimlessly, clattering onto the cheap Formica table. Her heart started hammering, a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. No! It can't be. I'm just tired. I'm seeing things. It's grief. She picked up the phone, her thumb trembling as she zoomed in, her finger pressing so hard on the cracked screen she was afraid it would break, the way his left eyebrow arched just a fraction higher than his right when he smiled. The small crescent-shaped scar on his chin from when he tried to build Leo's crib and slipped with a screwdriver, a story he'd told a dozen times. The details no one else would see, the details that were burned into her memory, carved into her heart. It was David. The blogger's voiceover cooed. The intensely private Dante Moretti, said to be from an old Florentine family, built his tech empire from the ground up in just under 3 years, specializing in digital security and asset protection. 3 years. The exact amount of time he had been dead. The flower on her hand suddenly felt like dust from a grave. The initial shock, the dizzying confusion, began to recede, and in its place, something else rose up from the depths of her soul. It was cold and heavy and sharp. It was a rage so pure, so potent, it felt like it could power a city. It burned away the fog of grief in an instant. He hadn't died. He had cashed out. He had kissed her goodbye. He had kissed his son goodbye. And he had walked away, taking her money, her future, her heart, and built a palace on top of their ruins. He let her mourn. He let her struggle. He let his own son grow up in poverty, thinking his father was a hero lost to the sea, while he was sipping champagne and reinventing himself as an Italian freaking mogul named Dante Moretti. The audacity, the absolute bottom of the ocean, black-hearted audacity. A switch flipped in Imani's soul. The grief she had carried like a shroud for 3 years evaporated in the heat of her fury. It didn't leave a void, it left a weapon. It left. The exhausted, heartbroken widow died in that moment, and someone far more dangerous was born. She stood up, her movements precise and deliberate. She walked to the closet and pulled down a heavy-duty storage container. Inside was her old life, her professional-grade stand mixer, her collection of rare pastry molds from France, her custom-made German steel chef's knives, the tools of a dream she had deferred for him. She ran a hand over the cool metal of the mixer. It felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. She took them to a culinary supply reseller. The man, old and gruff, knew their value. He gave her $3,000 in cash. It was a fraction of what they were worth, but it was more money than she'd seen in one place in years. It was the sacrifice of her old dream to fuel her new one, revenge. She went to the bank and withdrew every penny from her meager business account. Total war chest, $4,220. Back in her apartment, she opened her laptop, one-way ticket to Milan. 28 hours of travel, 3 layovers in cities she couldn't afford to see. She booked it without a second thought. Then she went to the shoebox under her bed, the one labeled Memories. She dug past Leo's first shoes, past a dried rose from their first anniversary. She found the silver compass. She found the official, crisp death certificate, a document that had once brought her to her knees in sorrow and now felt like a golden ticket. And she found her old phone, the one she'd used when David was alive. She powered it on, her hand steady, and found the last voicemail he ever left her. The sound of his voice, so full of fake love, made her stomach turn, but she saved the audio file and emailed it to herself. She had her receipts, all of them. She packed a single carry-on, toothbrush, a cheap change of clothes, and she looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror. The tired woman staring back, with flour in her hair and deep, dark shadows under her eyes, was not the woman who was going to pull this off. This wasn't a job for Imani, the grieving widow. This was a job for someone else entirely. She took her emergency credit card, the one with the $1,000 limit she'd sworn only to use if Leo was dying, and walked out the door. She went to a high-end consignment shop in a nicer part of town, a place where rich women discarded last season's treasures. And she found it, a dress, not black for mourning, not white for innocence. It was a slip of silk the color of a blood orange, the color of a sunset, the color of fire. It clung to her body as if it were made for her. She bought a pair of ridiculously high, strappy black heels she couldn't really walk in, and a shade of lipstick so dark red it was almost black. Back in her apartment, she wrote a long letter to her neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She tucked $3,000 in cash inside the envelope. She told her there was a family emergency she had to handle and asked her to look after Leo for a few days. She kissed her sleeping son's forehead, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost brought her to her knees. "I'm doing this for you, baby," she whispered, her voice thick, "so you can have the life you were always meant to have." 30 hours later, she landed in Milan. The air felt different. It smelled of money, history, and espresso. She took a bus and then a train to Lake Como, watching the stunning scenery pass by in a blur. She checked into a tiny, clean, but ridiculously cheap room with a view of a brick wall. She had less than $100 left to her name. It didn't matter. This was an investment. She showered, and the transformation began. She let the water wash away the last 3 years of struggle and exhaustion. The woman who emerged from that bathroom was not the baker from the rundown apartment. Her hair, which she'd usually worn in a practical bun, was slicked back in a severe, elegant style. Her eyes were lined and sharp, her cheekbones contoured. The blood orange dress fit her like a second skin, a stark, fiery slash of color against the pale grief she had worn for so long. The dark lipstick was her war paint. She looked in the small, warped mirror and saw a queen, a woman who had been to hell and was back to collect her dues. The brunch was over, but Tiff Travels had helpfully posted the location of that evening's main event, the Grand Gala at Villa d'Este, one of the most exclusive legendary hotels in the world. She took a taxi she couldn't afford to the gates of the villa. The place was a fortress of old-world elegance, lit by soft golden light. Security was everywhere, discreet but absolute. She took a deep breath, the cool night air steadying her nerves, smoothed down her dress, and walked toward the main entrance as if she owned the place. A man in a crisp suit and an earpiece stopped her. "Invitation, Senora?" Imani gave him a smile that was both dazzling and dismissive, a look she'd practiced in the mirror. "Oh, goodness," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of the bored wealthy women she saw stepping out of black cars. "My fiancé, Dante Moretti, must have forgotten to have me added to the list. So typical." She rolled her eyes playfully. "He's inside. Just tell him Imani is here." It was a high-stakes gamble. She was betting that in his new life, a man like Dante, would have secrets. A beautiful woman showing up unannounced would be seen as a potential scandal, an affair, something to be handled quietly and ushered inside, not a ghost from a past he had murdered and buried. The security guard's eyes flickered with professional interest. He spoke into his wrist in low, rapid Italian. He was getting instructions. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Please wait here, Signora." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Imani's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of serene, slightly annoyed confidence. Finally, a different man, clearly a senior manager in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, approached her. "Senora," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "my apologies for the confusion. Mr. Moretti is on the terrace. Please allow me to escort you." They thought she was a side chick, a mistress he was trying to keep hidden. Perfect. She was led through halls that dripped with history and wealth, past priceless tapestries and Murano glass chandeliers, out onto a sprawling marble terrace overlooking the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. A string quartet was playing something by Vivaldi. And there, in the center of it all, holding court, was David. He was standing with Isabella, his fiancée. She was even more striking in person, radiating a cool, intelligent power in a gown of shimmering silver. They were laughing with an older couple, Isabella's parents, no doubt. The picture of a perfect, powerful union. Imani began to walk toward them. Her new heels clicked on the marble, a sharp, staccato sound that seemed to cut through the music. People turned. A woman in a fiery dress, with a face like a coming storm, was walking with lethal purpose. The whisper started like a ripple in the water. "Who is she?" David must have felt the change in the air, the sudden drop in temperature. He turned his head, a casual, smiling glance over his shoulder, and his eyes met hers. The world stopped. The charming smile on his face didn't just fall. It evaporated. The color fled his handsome tanned face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. The glass of champagne in his hand shook, spilling onto the pristine marble floor. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw it all. Not just shock, but the primal, gut-wrenching terror of a man watching his carefully constructed universe crumble into dust. Isabella touched his arm, her brow furrowed with concern. "Dante? Tesoro, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Oh, you have no idea, honey," Imani thought, a cold satisfaction settling in her chest. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the beads of sweat forming on his brow, close enough to smell the lie on his breath. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice was low, calm, but it carried the weight of 3 years of hell, of cold nights and cheap meals, and a child's question she couldn't answer. He physically recoiled as if she'd struck him. He looked at Isabella, at her parents, his eyes wide with frantic panic. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice thin and reedy, all the cultivated bass notes of Dante Moretti gone. You must have me confused with someone else. My name is Dante Moretti. Isabella's sharp eyes darted between the two of them, the gears turning in her intelligent mind. Dante, do you know this woman? Imani gave a small, sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, he knows me, she said, her gaze locked on her husband's. We have a son together. His name is Leo. He just turned 4. He has your eyes. A collective gasp went through the crowd around them. Isabella's father, a formidable-looking man with a face carved from granite, took a protective step forward. She's lying! David choked out, his voice cracking, desperation making him loud and clumsy. Amara, she's insane. I've never seen her before in my life. Security. Insane, Amani said, her voice dangerously soft. I might be. Losing the love of your life in a tragic boating accident can do that to a person. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, a perfectly placed bomb. You gave me something once. For our first anniversary, you said it was so I could always find my way back to you. She reached into the tiny clutch she carried. Her hand didn't shake. She pulled out the small silver compass on its worn leather cord. She held it out on her palm, letting it catch the light from the candelabras. David stared at it like it was a venomous snake. On the back, Imani continued, her voice clear and strong, projecting to the silent, rapt audience. It's engraved. My North Star, my South, my East and West, deep was I forever. She flipped it over. In the dying light of the sun, the inscription gleamed. Isabella's eyes wide. She had seen that inscription because, as Imani had gambled, a man with no history, no creativity, no soul would have to recycle his best material. On Isabella's wrist was a delicate diamond-encrusted Cartier bracelet, a gift from Dante, and on the clasp, a tiny inscription. Isabella snatched his arm, her face a mask of cold fury, and read the inscription on her own bracelet aloud, her voice dripping with contempt. My North Star, my South. Her voice broke, not with sadness, but with rage. She looked at him with utter disgust. You pathetic, lazy thief. But Imani wasn't finished. This wasn't just for Isabella. This was for the whole world he had tried to build. You know, for a dead man, you have a very recognizable voice, she said, pulling out her phone. I kept your last voicemail, the one you left me the morning you died. She hit play, and in the stunned silence of the Italian twilight, David's voice filled the air, the voice of a loving husband. Hey, my love. Just calling to say I'm thinking about you. I love you more than anything in this world. You and Leo. I'll see you tonight. It was a confession, a ghost testifying at his own trial. David stumbled back, his face a grotesque mess of terror. That's not. And then there's this, Imani said, her voice dropping to a final fatal blow. She reached into her clutch one last time and pulled out the folded document. She snapped it open. The sound was like a gunshot. The state of Michigan officially declared you dead 3 years ago. I have the certificate. She held it up. The official seal. The name David Miller, the cause of death. Drowning. She turned to him, her eyes blazing with the fire of her dress. So, here's the problem, David. Or Dante, or whoever the hell you are. The dead can't own tech companies. The dead can't have offshore bank accounts. The dead can't marry heiresses. She took a step closer, her voice a venomous whisper that somehow everyone on that terrace heard. But a widow can inherit? And since Dante Moretti doesn't legally exist, his entire estate, this fairy tale life you built with my money, it all belongs to the estate of the late David Miller. Which means it all belongs to me and to your son. He finally broke. A strangled animal sound escaped his throat. He fell to his knees on the marble terrace, the billionaire mogul gone, replaced by the small, pathetic con man from a dead-end town. Isabella didn't cry. She was made of sterner stuff. She looked down at the pathetic man on the ground, then looked at Imani. She saw not an enemy, but an ally, a fellow victim of his grand deception. She gave a sharp, curt nod of respect. Her father was already on the phone, speaking rapid, angry Italian to his lawyers. The party was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. David, or Dante, was escorted by two very large, very unhappy men to a private suite. Imani was brought to another, far more luxurious one, where Isabella's family lawyers were waiting with espresso and legal pads. They weren't just helping her. They were helping themselves erase the stain of this man from their lives. It was a partnership born of mutual betrayal. He tried to negotiate. He begged. He cried. He offered her a settlement through the lawyers. $10 million. The message came back. Clean break. Imani, sitting across a long mahogany table from him the next day, flanked by Isabella's legal team, laughed in his face. It was not a happy sound. A settlement, she said, her voice like chipping ice. You think this is about money? I worked double shifts for 3 years, David. I sold my grandmother's wedding china to pay for our son's cold medicine. I held Leo while he cried for a father I thought was dead. You don't get to buy your way out of that. She laid out her terms. Not a settlement, an abdication. He would sign over every asset, every stock, every account, every shell corporation into a trust for Leo, with Imani as the sole administrator. He would be left with a one-way ticket back to the United States and the $500 in his wallet he had on him when he died. And if I don't, he whispered, his last shred of defiance flickering. If you don't, Imani said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto his, then this death certificate, along with evidence of your new identity and the wire transfers from our joint account 3 years ago, gets sent to the FBI and Interpol. You won't just be poor, David. You'll be in a federal prison for insurance fraud, identity fraud, and a dozen other things these very expensive lawyers will find. And I will tell our son that the hero he thought was in heaven was actually a monster rotting in a cage. He signed everything, every last page. Imani flew home first class. She didn't go back to the apartment. She had already arranged for a realtor to buy it, and she signed the deed over to her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, the kind woman who had watched Leo for her, along with a trust fund that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. Then she bought a building, a beautiful, sunlit commercial space in the best part of town with huge windows and original hardwood floors. She hired contractors, and 6 months later, she opened her dream. Phoenix Pastries. The name was her idea, a symbol of rising from the ashes. The day of the grand opening, she stood outside, looking at the gleaming sign. She wasn't just a baker. She was a CEO. She had built an empire for real this time, on the ashes of his lies. That evening, she drove to the coast. She stood on the sand, the same way she had stood on the shore of that lake 3 years ago, screaming his name into the wind. But this time she was silent. The ocean was calm. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver compass. So you can always find your way back to me. She smiled, a real, genuine smile, the first one in years that reached her eyes. Joke's on you, David, she whispered to the wind. I don't need to find my way back to you. I found my way back to me. She drew her arm back and threw it as hard as she could. It spun through the air, a silver disk against the twilight, before the ocean took it without a sound, bearing his last lie in the depths. She turned her back on the water and walked away, not looking back. She had a son to tuck into bed and a bakery to open in the morning. She was free. So you see, baby girl, they can take your money, they can steal your dreams, they can even try to kill the woman you used to be, but they can never, ever extinguish that fire inside. All they can do is give you a reason to let it burn the whole damn world down and build your own palace on the ashes. Now, who wants another cup of tea? This one's on me.